told him to be a man, never expecting he'd take it literally and walk out. Hi, Reddit. My name is Laura, and this is my very first time posting here. I honestly don't know what I'm doing here. Perhaps to bear my mind, or maybe in some sort of deluded state, seek help if there's any way to try and undo my wrongs. I'm sure there's no help at this point, but it doesn't stop me from hoping. Dan and I have been married for 10 years with 2 kids, and I have always known him as a steady person. He's the kind of husband who tries his best to avoid conflict. He would always try to smooth things over rather than stand his ground. For years, I thought that was a good thing. He was always patient and forgiving with me, even when I pushed too hard or took things too far. But along the way, I started perceiving his steadiness as weakness. I didn't notice it at first, but over time, little cracks started forming in our marriage. It was something that started out slowly and grew worse as time went on. He never fought back or challenged me even when I knew I was in the wrong. He always let me be in charge. Initially, I thought it was okay, but as it continued, I stopped appreciating it. Our lives moved forward, but I kept on having that strong feeling of dissatisfaction. I found myself wishing he'd step up, show more initiative, or at least push back once in a while. And instead of encouraging him to be a supportive wife, I was the opposite, nagging and telling him to take charge at all times. Numerous times the kids had been caught in the crossfire, usually me being the lead of the arguments. Whole Dan would just quietly watch me. And then that day, that horrible day, Dan had told me he found out about something that I thought I was hiding so perfectly well. And instead of being scared and apologizing, I had insulted him deeply. He didn't yell, he didn't fight back. He just looked at me, quiet and intense, before walking out of the room angrily. I thought he'd come back like he always did, but he didn't. That moment was the start of something I didn't see coming, something that would change everything about our marriage and our lives. I had not known that Dan had found out about that one thing I was so stupidly confident that he wouldn't. And days later, I realized just how awfully wrong I was. I had an affair with someone at work, Aaron. I and Aaron were assigned to the same project at the office. Aaron was everything Dan wasn't. I felt like where Dan was quiet and reserved, Aaron was bold and confident. He had this energy about him that drew people in, and unfortunately for me, I was one of those people. It started small, little compliments during work meetings, the kind of flirty banter that felt harmless at the time. But it didn't stay harmless for long. Aaron had a way of making me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. He noticed things about me, how I styled my hair, the way I bit my lip when I was nervous, and he pointed them out in a way that always made me flattered. The first time we crossed the line, it was almost inevitable. We'd stayed late at the office to finish a project, and one thing led to another. Before I knew it, we started kissing in his office. I should have felt guilty, but I didn't. I felt alive, like I was waking up after years of sleepwalking through my life. Aaron made me feel wanted, desired, like I was the only woman he had ever wanted, even if it was only for a moment. From there, things escalated quickly. We started meeting in secret, hotel rooms, empty conference rooms, anywhere we could steal a few minutes alone. It was exhilarating, the kind of rush I hadn't felt since I was young and reckless. With Aaron, I didn't have to think about the monotony of my life or the resentment that had been building in my marriage. I could always be myself with him. The way his hands felt on my body was everything I could ask for during those times. He always made me forget all my troubles. It wasn't just physical, though Aaron listened to me in ways Dan never did. He often asked about my dreams, my fears, the things that kept me up at night. He made me feel important, like my thoughts and feelings mattered. I convinced myself that what we had was more than just an affair, that it was something real, something worth holding on to. I ignored the voice in my head telling me it was all a fantasy, that Aaron was only in it for the thrill. I didn't want to face the truth, so I told myself lies instead. Then it all blew up in one night. I don't know why his reaction bothered me so much. I should have felt guilty when Dan sat me down that night, his voice firm with anger as he told me he had found out about the affair, but instead, all I felt was irritation. I thought I could handle anything that happened. I knew there was a chance Dan would find out eventually. It was a risk I'd been taking for months. but I never imagined he'd react that way. I thought he would perhaps react as timidly as he had always done in the past, but instead, sitting in front of me was Dan, trembling with anger and looking at me like I had magically grown 2 horns. And I should have been intimidated by his anger, and I should have groveled and begged for his forgiveness, but when he mentioned words like cheap and sex worker in the same sentence as my name, I had gotten really upset, and before I could stop myself, I snapped. I told him that it was his fault, that he was the one that drove me to cheat, and that I cheated with someone I saw more fit to be man than he ever was. The words came out sharper than I intended, and the moment they hit, I saw something shift in him. His face, already pale, went rigid, and his eyes darkened in a way I'd never seen before. Dan wasn't the kind of man to get visibly angry. He always swallowed his emotions, burying them somewhere deep where they couldn't hurt anyone. But this time, he didn't. For the first time in our marriage, he looked at me with something I couldn't quite place. Hurt, yes, but also fury, and something else that made my chest tightened. Disgust. He didn't say anything. He didn't yell or lash out like I half expected him to. He just stood up, walked to the bedroom, and started packing a bag. I followed him, trying to understand what he was doing, but he didn't acknowledge me. He moved with a quiet determination, pulling clothes off hangers and tossing them into the suitcase, without so much as a glance in my direction. It wasn't like him. This wasn't the man I'd been married to for 10 years, the man who avoided conflict at all costs. This was someone else entirely. When he was done, he looked at me and told me that I was going to wish I never married him in the first place by the time he was done with dealing with me. He zipped the suitcase, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door. Just like that, he was gone, and I was left standing there. I was shaken with fear and completely unprepared for what had just happened. I thought he'd come back. I thought he just needed some time to cool off, and that he said what he had said out of anger. I was hoping that he'd walk back through that door once he realized I wasn't going to chase after him. But I had never realized that he had this determined side to him. I was just realizing that he was gentle with me all those years because he was only deeply in love with me. I waited until hours turned into days, days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of him. I tried calling, but he wouldn't answer. I left messages, asking him to come home so we could talk, but he never responded. It was like he'd vanished, leaving me alone with the weight of what I'd done. The silence gave me too much time to think, and I started replaying everything in my head, and every moment that led up to that night. And no matter how hard I tried to justify it to myself, I couldn't escape the truth. I'd been selfish. I'd been reckless. And now I was paying the price. The days after Dan walked out were some of the most unsettling days of my life. I kept waiting for him to come back, for things to go back to the way they always had. Dan was the kind of person who avoided confrontation, who hated letting problems fester. In the past, whenever we had a fight, he'd sulk for a few hours, or maybe a day, but then he'd come back, ready to make amends. This time, though, he didn't come back. The house felt emptier with each passing hour, and the silence started to gnaw at me. I tried calling him at first. I left messages, apologies, explanations, pleas for him to just talk to me, but he didn't respond. Every time his phone went to voicemail, my frustration grew. I couldn't understand what he was doing, or why he wasn't willing to at least have a conversation. It was so unlike him. He was always the one trying to fix things, to smooth things over, no matter how messy they were. But now, it was like he'd disappeared entirely. I found out he was staying with a friend when one of our mutual acquaintances let it slip. They didn't give me much detail, just enough to let me know that Dan was okay, and that he was different. I didn't understand what they meant at first. Different how? What was he doing that was so out of character? But the more I dug, the more I started to realize that something had shifted in him. He wasn't just avoiding me. He was changing. It started with little things, Dot. He was reconnecting with friends he hadn't seen in ages, going out more, even hitting the gym regularly. Dan had always been content with his routines, happy to spend his evenings at home with a book or a movie, but now it seemed like he was throwing himself into anything that kept him out of the house and away from me. At first I told myself it was just his way of coping, that he'd come around eventually once he worked through his emotions. But the more I heard, the more I started to realize that this wasn't just about coping. Dan wasn't just trying to distract himself. He was building a new version of himself, one that didn't include me. The real shock came a few days later when I learned the full extent of what Dan knew. I don't know how he found out or when he started putting the pieces together, but it turned out he'd been gathering evidence of my affair. Text messages, emails, photos. He had everything. He found out about the secret lunches, the hotel meetups, even the times I'd lied about staying late at work. He'd been watching, quietly documenting every move I made while I was too wrapped up in my own selfishness to notice. When I first heard about it, I didn't believe it. It didn't seem possible. Dan wasn't the type to snoop or spy. At least I didn't think he was. But the evidence was undeniable. A mutual friend mentioned that Dan had shown them some of the messages, proof that he wasn't just making baseless accusations. Hearing that made my stomach drop. I felt exposed in a way I never had before, like every lie I'd told, every secret I'd kept, had been laid out for the world to see. I started to panic. If Dan had all of that evidence, what was he planning to do with it? Was he going to confront me? Was he going to show it to our families, our friends? The thought of him exposing me like that was terrifying. I'd built my life around this image of being the perfect wife, the one who had it all together, and now that image was crumbling. I couldn't stop imagining the looks on people's faces when they found out the truth, the judgment and disappointment that would follow me everywhere I went. What scared me the most, though, was the realization that Dan wasn't the man I thought I knew. He wasn't just the passive, forgiving husband who would do anything to avoid a fight. Somewhere along the way, he decided to fight back, and I had no idea what he was capable of. The quiet anger I'd seen in his eyes the night he left now felt like a warning, a sign that he was done playing the role of the pushover, and I had no idea how far he was willing to go. The house felt colder without him. Every room was a reminder of what I'd done, of the life we'd built together, and the ways I'd slowly chipped away at it. I started noticing little things that I hadn't paid attention to before. How his side of the closet was empty. How the coffee mug he used every morning was gone from the shelf. It was like he was erasing himself from our home, piece by piece, and I was powerless to stop it. I couldn't stop thinking about the evidence he had, about the fact that he'd known for so long and hadn't said anything. It made me question everything. The idea that he'd been quietly biding his time, gathering proof, while I went about my affair like nothing was wrong, made me feel sick. I'd underestimated him completely, and now I was paying the price. The worst part was knowing that I'd done this to myself. I couldn't blame Dan for the choices he was making now, no matter how much they hurt. I was the one who broke our marriage, who let resentment and selfishness drive me into someone else's arms. And now, as I watched him rebuild his life without me, I realized just how much I'd taken him for granted. Dan might not have been perfect, but he'd loved me, and I'd thrown that love away like it meant nothing. I don't know what's coming next, but I'm terrified of it. Dan isn't the same man he was when he walked out of this house, and I have no idea what he's planning or how far he's willing to go. All I know is that the life I thought I had is gone, and there's no going back. At first, I didn't even realize what he was doing. I was too busy trying to figure out where he was, how to talk to him, and whether I could salvage anything. But Dan wasn't the man I thought I knew anymore. The quiet, passive man who once avoided conflict at all costs had been replaced by someone colder, sharper, and entirely unpredictable. The first sign came when my phone started buzzing with messages, first from a few friends, then from family. At first, the messages were vague, but the tone was unmistakable. People were asking if the rumors were true, if I'd really done what Dan was telling them I had. That's when I realized he wasn't keeping this between us. He'd told people, our families, our friends, even mutual acquaintances, who had no business knowing the details of our marriage. He wasn't just confronting me with my lies, he was putting them on display for the world to see. The details he shared were devastatingly precise. It wasn't just a vague story about infidelity. He had screenshots of text messages, photos, and even evidence of the hotel bookings I'd made with Aaron. He laid it all out in a way that left no room for doubt. People I'd known for years, people who used to smile and chat with me like I was part of their family, were now looking at me like I was a stranger. Worse than that, like I was something to be ashamed of. My family was the hardest to face. My mom called me, her voice shaking as she told me she didn't understand how I could do something like this. She said I'd embarrassed the entire family, that she didn't know who I was anymore. My dad barely spoke, but the silence was worse than anything he could have said. Even my siblings, who'd always been my closest allies, were distant. They didn't know what to say to me, and I didn't have the words to explain myself. What could I say? That I'd let resentment and selfishness ruin everything? That I destroyed my marriage for a thrill? It all sounded so pathetic when I said it in my head. Dan didn't stop with our families. He went to our friends too, the same people we used to host dinner parties with, the ones who came to our wedding and toasted our happiness. One by one, they started pulling away. At first, they offered polite, neutral responses when I tried to reach out, but it didn't take long for the truth to come out. Most of them were firmly on Dan's side, and the ones who didn't openly condemn me still made it clear that they didn't want to get involved. I was being pushed out of the life I'd spent years building, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The final blow came when I learned that Dan had contacted Aaron's wife. I didn't even know she existed until then. Aaron had always been careful to keep his personal life separate from the time we spent together, but Dan found her. He sent her everything, screenshots of our messages, photos, and even a timeline of the affair. I can only imagine what it must have felt like for her to see it all laid out like that. I didn't hear from her directly, but the fallout was immediate. Aaron had called me and blamed me for everything. He told me that I was only a distraction, and that if his wife went through the divorce she was threatening him with, he'd make my life a living hell. I was furious at first, but beneath the anger was a sickening sense of fear. Dan wasn't just angry, he was methodical. Every move he made felt calculated, designed to strip me of the control I thought I had. He didn't yell or scream, he let the evidence speak for itself. He let the people around us make their own judgments, knowing full well what their verdict would be. And in the process, he was dismantling every support system I had, piece by piece. As if all of that wasn't enough, Dan also started taking steps to secure his own future. I found out through a lawyer, his lawyer, that he was filing for divorce. Not only that, but he was seeking full custody of our kids. He was using the evidence of my affair as grounds to prove that I was unfit, that I couldn't provide a stable home for them. I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. Dan, the man who once couldn't even bring himself to argue with me, was now positioning himself as the strong, stable parent while I was being painted as a selfish, irresponsible failure. I barely recognized him anymore. He was more confident, more assertive, and more focused than I'd ever seen him. He wasn't just rebuilding his life, he was thriving. Meanwhile, I was stuck in the wreckage, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. I'd spent years resenting Dan for being passive, for letting me take control of our marriage. But now that he was in control, I didn't know how to handle it. I told him to be a man, and now that he's doing it, I don't know how to handle it. I tried reaching out to him once, desperate to at least have a conversation, but he shut me down immediately. He didn't yell or curse at me. He just told me it was too late, that I'd made my choices, and now I had to live with them. His calmness was the most unsettling part. There was no trace of the man who used to love me so deeply, no sign of the man who used to bend over backward to make me happy. That man was gone, and in his place was someone who knew exactly what he wanted and knew how to make me pay for what I'd done. I can't stop thinking about how different things might have been if I'd handled that night differently. If I hadn't lashed out, if I hadn't told him to be a man, maybe none of this would have happened. But now, all I can do is watch as Dan takes control of everything I used to hold on to, leaving me to pick up the pieces of a life I no longer recognize. Update. Hi, it's me again, and it's been 2 weeks since I made my first post, and I feel like I'm barely holding on. Every day since Dan walked out has been a new reminder of how much I've lost, and how quickly everything has fallen apart. I keep telling myself that it can't get worse, but somehow it always does. The reality I'm living now feels like a punishment I can't escape from, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to handle it, and I don't know what to do with myself. 2 days ago, I received the official divorce papers. Seeing the envelope with his lawyer's name on it made my stomach drop, but I told myself it would just be the usual division of assets, the start of something we'd eventually sort out. I wasn't prepared for what I saw when I opened it. Dan isn't just filing for divorce, he's seeking full custody of our 2 children. The papers laid out his reasoning in brutal detail, citing my affair, my unstable behavior, and his ability to provide a better environment for them. I read the words over and over, but they didn't feel real. Dan, the man who used to avoid conflict at all costs, is now trying to take my kids away from me. And the worst part is, I don't know if I can stop him. I don't know if there's a way I can convince the court that I can take care of my kids. I can already feel the shift happening. The kids have been spending more time with him lately. He picks them up for dinner, takes them to the park, does all the things he used to let me handle. At first, I thought it was just him trying to bond with them, maybe make up for the tension they've been feeling between us. I thought he was trying to bring a little bit of normal into the kids' routine with all the mess going on around us. But now I see it for what it is. He's building his case. He's showing them that he's the stable parent, the one they can rely on, while I'm left scrambling to keep up. It's working too. I can see it in the way they talk about him, the way their faces light up when he comes to pick them up. I'm happy they love their dad, but it's hard not to feel like I'm losing them, one day at a time. He's trying to take our kids away. I've started meeting with my own lawyer, but even they've admitted that Dan's case is strong. He has all the evidence of my affair, the messages, the photos, everything, and he's using it to paint a picture of me as someone unfit to raise our kids. I don't know how to argue against that. I keep telling myself that I'm a good mom, that I've always been there for them. But how do I prove that when Dan has so much ammunition to use against me? The fallout from my affair hasn't stopped either. Aaron, the man I thought cared about me, has completely cut ties. When Dan exposed everything, Aaron was quick to distance himself. My social circle has shrunk to almost nothing. Friends who used to text me every day have gone silent, and the ones who do reach out only want gossip. Even my family is struggling to be supportive. My mom calls to check in, but her disappointment is obvious. She keeps asking me what I was thinking, why I let it get this bad, and I don't have an answer for her. I don't even know why I made the choices I did. All I know is that I can't undo them now. And then there's Dan. He's thriving in a way that feels almost surreal. He's going to therapy, reconnecting with old friends, and even going out more. Mutual acquaintances have told me how happy he seems, how confident and self-assured he's become. It's like my betrayal lit a fire in him, and now he's using it to build a better version of himself. I should be happy for him, I know that, but instead I feel bitter. I feel angry that he gets to come out of this stronger while I'm left picking up the pieces of a life I destroyed. Why is he thriving when I'm literally drowning in this mess? I don't feel anger towards him, though. I feel anger towards myself for letting things get this bad. The house feels so empty without him. Every little thing reminds me of him. The chair he used to sit in, the coffee mug he always used, even the smell of his cologne lingering in the bedroom. I can't escape the memories, and every time I think about how much I took him for granted. I thought I wanted something more, but now that he's gone, I realize I was blind to everything he brought to my life. I was just ungrateful. I've started losing track of the days. Now, every morning feels the same, waking up to an empty bed, trying to find the energy to get through the day, wondering how I let everything get this bad, crash from mental and emotional exhaustion at night, then repeat. The guilt is overwhelming, but it's mixed with this bitterness I can't seem to shake. I keep replaying the night he walked out, wondering if things would be different if I'd just kept my mouth shut. If I hadn't told him to be a man, would he have stayed? Would he have given me a chance to fix this? Reddit, I don't know what to do. I'm losing everything, my husband, my kids, my friends, and I don't know how to stop it. How do I prove to Dan that I'm still a good mother, that I'm not the person he's making me out to be? I know I've lost him, and he made sure I lost my kids too. I can't even try to convince myself that I'll be okay. It's been so difficult for me. Thank you guys, I'll be back here with more updates. Update. Hi Reddit, this may be my last post here. It's been a month since I made my first post, and if I thought things couldn't get worse, I was wrong. The divorce is already finalized, and Dan won the custody lawsuit. Every day feels heavier than the last, and every time I think I've reached rock bottom, something happens to remind me that I can fall further. Every day I wake up to the same monotony. I wake up to these pains that are permanently lodged in my brain and heart, and I think every minute about what I have done to ruin everything, and then I go to bed thinking the same thing and praying that somehow I would wake up and find the whole situation has just been a dream. But then I wake up and repeat the same cycle every day. At this point, I don't even know who I am anymore. The life I built, the person I thought I was, it's all gone. All I'm left with is the fallout of my own choices and the overwhelming regret that comes with it. The latest blow came when I found out Dan is seeing someone new. A friend, one of the few who still speaks to me, told me he met her through work. Apparently, she's everything I'm not right now, supportive, accomplished, and grounded. Hearing that made my stomach drop. I can't help but picture them together, her listening to him in a way I never did, her giving him the stability and kindness I took for granted. It hurts more than I want to admit, and I hate myself for feeling jealous when I'm the one who pushed him away. From what I've heard, she's been helping him heal, encouraging him to focus on himself and move forward. Dan's transformation is undeniable. He's thriving socially, emotionally, and even physically. He's confident in a way I never saw when we were together. Mutual friends have started praising him for how he's handled everything, saying how strong he is and how much better off he seems now. I feel like I'm watching him build a life that I was supposed to be part of, but instead I'm stuck on the outside looking in. Meanwhile, I'm struggling to regain my footing. Every day feels like a battle just to keep going. The house feels emptier than ever, the silence a constant reminder of what I've lost. I barely sleep, and when I do, I wake up feeling like I've been hit by a truck. The kids are now living permanently with Dan after the divorce, and every time I get to see them, I can't help but feel like they're slipping away from me too. They talk about him constantly, about the fun things he's doing with them, and I'm happy they're happy, but it's hard not to feel like I'm being replaced. I've been trying to piece together what went wrong, where I could have stopped this before it spiraled out of control. Looking back, there were so many moments where I could have made a different choice, but I didn't. I let resentment build between us, convincing myself that Dan's passivity was the root of all our problems. I ignored the ways he tried to show me love because it didn't look the way I wanted it to. And when Aaron came along, I let myself believe that I deserved the excitement he offered, that it was okay to step outside my marriage as long as I kept it hidden. I was so wrong. I could have ended the affair before it even started. I should have recognized it for what it was, a quick adventure that wasn't going anywhere, a temporary escape from the frustration I felt in my marriage, and shut it down before it went too far. But instead, I let myself get swept up in the attention and the thrill of something new. I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone because Dan didn't know, but that was a lie. I told myself that what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him, but that's a lie. No secret stays hidden forever. Even if he didn't know at the time, I was still betraying him, still driving a wedge between us that I could never take back. The night Dan confronted me, I could have handled it differently. I keep replaying that moment in my head, thinking about the look in his eyes when he told me he knew. I should have apologized and begged him for his forgiveness, instead of trying to make excuses and blaming him for what wasn't his fault in the first place, because I was too blinded by my selfishness to see it. I had even told him to be a man and accept that I cheated because he wasn't man enough. I didn't see it at the time, but that moment was the turning point. That was when I lost him. Even after he walked out, there may have been chances to stop this from spiraling further. I could have been honest, taken responsibility for what I'd done, and tried to rebuild the trust I'd destroyed. But instead, I kept lying to myself, blaming Dan for being weak, for not fighting back the way I thought he should. I couldn't see that he was fighting in his own way, that he was quietly taking control of his life and leaving me behind in the process. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. Now all I have left is regret. I regret every decision that led me here, every lie I told, every moment I let my selfishness take over. I regret not appreciating Dan for who he was, for the love he gave me even when I didn't deserve it. I regret the way I hurt him, the way I pushed him to a breaking point he didn't deserve to reach. And most of all, I regret losing him. The worst part is knowing that this could have been avoided. If I'd just taken the time to address the resentment I felt, if I'd communicated with Dan instead of shutting him out, if I'd valued what we had instead of looking for something more, none of this would have happened. If only I had valued our family enough to communicate how I felt, to try to change the situation rather than jumping into the nearest distraction, none of this would have happened. We could still be a family. I could still have the life I took for granted, but now all I can do is watch as Dan builds a better life without me, and I'm left trying to figure out how to move forward. I don't know if there's any hope of reconciliation. Dan is so far removed from the man I used to know, and I don't think he'd ever take me back after everything that's happened. But part of me wants to try, to at least apologize and let him know how much I regret what I've done. But then the other part of me knows that the new Dan that everyone's in support of will never accept my apology. Because I've gone and done everything against the book, and now I must pay. It feels like life is slipping off my hands every moment I keep thinking about everything that has happened. There's nobody to even blame except myself. Reddit's, I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm trapped in the wreckage of my own choices, and I don't know how to climb out of it. Maybe I'm stuck in this cycle forever and I will never recover. Maybe this is my future, carved and shaped by the stupid choices I made and cannot seem to get back from. Goodbye, guys. I sure hope none of you turn out like me.